They say that a thunderstorm washes away the filth of the world, but in the countryside of Oregon, we know that the deep black storm clouds don't just bring rain. They hide things that belong to the sky. My name is David, and I lived alone in a small wooden cabin surrounded by miles of dead grass and thick forgotten woods. Last summer, the weather forecast warned of a supercell, a massive historic storm system that turned the afternoon sky into an unnatural bruised green. The air felt heavy, metallic, like a warning before an execution. By 9 p.m., the storm arrived with full fury. The rain didn't just fall, it slammed against my glass windows like thousands of tiny rocks thrown by an angry crowd. The wind was howling so loud it sounded like a dying animal trapped under the house. Then the inevitable happened. The power lines snapped outside. The lights flickered twice and died, plunging my cabin into a pitch blackness so thick I couldn't even see my own hands. The only light left came from the brilliant, blinding flashes of lightning that ripped through the clouds every few seconds, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. I sat on my sofa with a heavy metal flashlight, holding my breath, waiting it out. Boom. A massive crack of thunder shook the entire wooden foundation of my house, making the plates in the kitchen rattle. In the flash of lightning that followed, I accidentally looked out the large glass door leading to my backyard. For a fraction of a second, the entire field was illuminated as bright as day. And there, standing right in the middle of the grass, was a silhouette. It was too tall to be a man. It had to be at least 8 or 9 feet tall. It stood perfectly still, facing my cabin, its long, thin arms hanging past its knees. I blinked, and darkness returned. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I told myself it was just a tree, just my mind playing tricks in the dark. The next flash of lightning came 5 seconds later. Flash. The figure was closer. It was now standing at the very edge of my porch. It didn't walk. It didn't run. It seemed to move only when the darkness covered it, teleporting closer with every strike of light. I scrambled back, tripping over the coffee table and dropping my flashlight. It rolled away, its beam pointing uselessly at the corner. Flash. The porch was empty. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking it was gone. But then, a sudden drop in temperature made my breath turn to fog inside my own living room. Flash. It was right there. Its face was pressed flat against the glass door, just inches from where I stood. Through the pouring rain running down the glass, I saw its horrific features during that brief microsecond of light. It had no eyes, just deep hollow black sockets that leaked black rainwater like tears. Its skin was translucent and wet, showing dark pulsating veins beneath. But the most terrifying thing was its mouth. It was open unnaturally wide in a silent scream, filled with rows of yellow, needle-like teeth. The rain grew heavier, deafening, a solid wall of sound. Boom. Another lightning strike hit a tree right outside, setting it ablaze. In that continuous flickering glare, I watched the creature raise a long, bony arm. Its fingers ended in razor-sharp claws. It began to tap against the glass. Tap. 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 The sound was crystal clear, cutting through the roaring thunder. Suddenly, the wind howled with a demonic force, and the latch on the glass door gave way. The door flew open, shattering the glass against the wall. The storm invaded my living room, freezing rain and dead leaves soaking everything. I didn't think. I just ran into my bedroom, slammed the heavy wooden door, and locked it. I pressed my back against the wall in the dark, crying, praying for the sun to rise. In the darkness, I heard it enter. I could hear its heavy, wet footsteps thudding on the hardwood floor of the living room, accompanied by the choking smell of ozone, sulfur, and wet earth. It walked slowly, dragging its long claws against the walls. Screech! It stopped right outside my bedroom door. I covered my mouth to muffle my sobs as the doorknob began to rattle slowly. Jiggle. Jiggle. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the lightning stopped. The wind died down to a gentle breeze, and the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the room in a warm orange light. I cautiously unlocked the door and stepped out. The living room was ruined, soaked in water and littered with shattered glass. The creature was gone. There were no wet footprints on the floor anymore. I tried to convince myself it was all a terrible nightmare caused by the storm. But when I walked back into my bedroom to pack my bags, my blood turned to ice. There, written on the ceiling right above my bed in dark, wet mud that was still dripping onto my pillow, were the words, "The clouds will return tomorrow, David." Now, I live in the city, inside a room with no windows. But every time I hear the faint rumble of thunder in the distance, or see a gray cloud on the horizon, my hands begin to shake, because I know that when the rain starts falling, it never comes down alone. They always warned us about the Blackwood Lighthouse, but nobody ever talked about the old stone house built right next to it, sitting on the edge of the jagged cliffs overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. My name is Ethan, and I inherited that house from my estranged uncle. The locals at the harbor told me to sell it without ever stepping inside. They said the sea doesn't like anyone living on that cliff when the storm hits. I should have listened. It was a cold Tuesday evening when the storm of the century arrived. The sky didn't just turn dark, it turned a deep, ink-black color, and the ocean below began to roar like 1,000 angry beasts. By 10:00 p.m., the rain was blinding, slamming against the thick glass windows of the house. The waves down below were so massive that every time they crashed against the cliffside, the entire stone house would vibrate. It felt like the sea was trying to shake me out of it. Then, the power went out. The house fell into complete darkness, except for the rhythmic sweeping yellow beam of the nearby lighthouse that cut through my windows every 10 seconds. Sweep, dark, sweep, dark. It was hypnotizing until the ocean started making a sound that wasn't just waves. It sounded like something heavy, wet, and massive was dragging itself up the rocky cliffs. I stood by the living room window, waiting for the lighthouse beam to turn around. Sweep. The cliff was empty. 10 seconds of darkness. Sweep. My heart stopped. There, standing halfway up the cliff path in the pouring rain, was a figure. It was covered in thick, dark sea mud and tangled kelp. The next time the light hit, it was closer. It was moving up the rocks with unnatural speed, its body bending and twisting like it had no bones. It was coming straight for the house. I backed away into the kitchen, grabbing a kitchen knife, my hands shivering from the freezing cold. Thud. The heavy wooden front door rattled. The smell of rotting fish and salty seawater instantly filled the hallway, seeping through the cracks. Whatever was outside was soaked. Boom. A flash of lightning lit up the kitchen, and at that exact microsecond, I saw a face pressed against the kitchen window. It was horrific. The skin was bloated and pale, wrinkled from being underwater for too long. Its eyes were wide open, completely black, with no pupils, staring blankly into the room. But the worst part was its jaw. It was unhinged, hanging low, and seawater was pouring out of its mouth onto the windowsill. Tap. 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 It began to knock on the glass with a webbed, bony finger. Then, in a wet, gurgling voice that sounded like it was speaking underwater, it whispered my name. Ethan, the sea is lonely. Come down to us. Suddenly, the pressure from the storm shattered the living room window. Cold rain and the violent sea wind roared into the house. I heard the front door burst open. The heavy, wet footsteps started walking down my hallway. Squish, squish, squish. I ran to the attic, locking the small door behind me, huddled in the corner as the lighthouse beam kept sweeping across the ceiling. When the storm finally passed and the sun rose over the calm ocean, the police found me half frozen in the attic. The house below was completely flooded with seawater, fish scales, and black mud. The creature was gone. But on the wet floor of the living room, leading from the shattered window back down toward the raging ocean cliffs, were giant, dragging tracks in the mud and a single rusted gold ring that belonged to my grandfather who had drowned at sea 30 years ago. They always tell you to fear the sounds in the dark, the creaks, the steps, the scratches, but they are wrong. The most terrifying thing you can encounter in an old house isn't a sound. It is a sudden, unnatural silence. A silence so deep that it feels like the air has been sucked out of the room, leaving your ears ringing. My name is Ryan, and I was house sitting for my aunt in a remote rural area. The house was a massive, 2-story wooden structure built in the 1940s. It was late, around 2:45 am, and I was lying in bed reading a book. The house was full of normal night noises, the hum of the old refrigerator downstairs, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, and the distant chirping of crickets outside. It was comforting. And then, in a single second, everything stopped. The refrigerator hum died. The crickets outside instantly went mute, as if a hand had been placed over the entire forest. Even the grandfather clock stopped ticking. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It felt physical, pressing down on my chest. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, and in that dead quiet, the sound of my own heartbeat felt deafening. Thump. 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 I sat up in bed, my skin prickling with goosebumps. The air in the room suddenly turned freezing cold. I could see my breath forming small white clouds in the dark. I listened as hard as I could, hoping for any normal sound, a wind rustling the trees, a car in the distance. Nothing. The silence was absolute. Then, I realized something that made my stomach drop. The shadows in the corner of my room weren't right. The moonlight was shining through the window, casting a long, sharp reflection of the closet door onto the floor. But right next to it, there was another shadow. It was tall, thin, and entirely featureless. It didn't belong to any furniture. As I stared at it, the shadow slowly began to detach itself from the wall. It moved across the floor toward the edge of my bed. There was no sound of footsteps, no rustling of clothes. It moved like ink spreading through water. I tried to open my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. It was as if the entity was feeding on sound itself, stealing the voice right out of my throat. The figure stopped at the foot of my bed. In the dim moonlight, I could see it now. It was a humanoid shape, but its skin was completely black, absorbing the light around it like a void. It had no face, except for a wide frozen grin made of perfectly white, human-like teeth. It slowly leaned over me. The closer it got, the louder the ringing in my ears became. It felt like my eardrums were going to burst from the sheer pressure of the silence. It raised a long, shadow-like finger and placed it where its lips should be. Shh. That single whisper didn't come from the room. It echoed directly inside my own mind, cold and scraping. The creature didn't attack. It just stood there, leaning over my face, smiling its horrific, toothy grin in complete dead stillness for what felt like hours. I couldn't move a muscle. I was completely paralyzed by fear. I closed my eyes, tears of pure terror running down my face, waiting for the end. When the grandfather clock suddenly let out a loud chime at 6 a.m., the spell broke. The refrigerator started humming again, and the morning birds began to chirp. I snapped out of my paralysis and opened my eyes. The room was empty. The shadow was gone. I packed my bags and left within 10 minutes. I never went back to that house. But now, whenever I am sitting alone in my apartment and the room suddenly goes completely quiet, when the hum of the TV stops or the outside traffic dies down, I freeze. I hold my breath, and I refuse to look behind me. Because I know that it doesn't need locks or doors to get in. It just waits for the silence.